Welcome back to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast, the show for people who are ready to break out of survival mode in order to build a truly thriving life. I'm Amanda Sollman, and along with Mark Jewell and the rest of my team here at Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, we break down common roadblocks that keep people stuck surviving and share ideas to help you thrive each and every day.
In 2016, I left the company that I had started my career with straight out of college to come to MJST for a new adventure. But I've had the good fortune of pretty much every year since then to go back to Minnesota, where the job was at, to visit with friends and other connections that I'd made while on that job. And I had that same opportunity here about a month or so ago when I traveled back to Minnesota for a former coworker's wedding. And I will tell you, every time I travel and get to meet up with those folks, it just makes me remember how thankful I am for that first job. It taught me a huge amount, connected me with so many amazing people. And so I've been thinking a lot about that since I was at this wedding in particular. And since today is the day after Thanksgiving, and I was sort of looking for a way to think about what I'm appreciating, I figured this would be a great tie-in to that. And so I want to talk a little bit about what were some lessons I learned in my first job that continue to serve me to this day. And I really want to do that for a couple of reasons. One, we work with a lot of early career professionals through coaching, and those folks are still navigating that transition from college into work. And I think a lot of the things I learned might be useful to some of those people. Secondly, if you're a manager, I think it can be easy to forget, A, what it is like to be new on the job, and B, I think it can be hard to connect with a younger generation of employees that are coming in. And so I think some of these things that I keep reflecting on are things that we as leaders and managers might think about how we can more purposely create for our younger employees. So let's just go ahead and dig into the 5 things that I am very thankful I learned on my first job. The number one lesson I learned was how to advocate for yourself. So a little background on this. I know that the millennial generation, to which I belong, sometimes gets a bad rap for being quote unquote entitled and for asking for advancement or promotions or raises or whatever before they have earned it, right? And I'm sure those people are out there, but I can also tell you that from coaching tons of these early career professionals, there seems to be an equally large group of millennials and even younger who are terrified of advocating for themselves. And in all transparency, the second group, these are my people, because it's something that is really scary for me too. And so the way I look at this is advocating for yourself really shows up in 2 ways that I learned in my first job. So one is around negotiation and negotiating for yourself in terms of salary, compensation, that sort of thing. And the second is asking for what you want and what you need. So I'm going to kind of dig into those 2 things separately. So let's dig into the first one, because I actually think that's a little bit smaller of a category. So negotiating for salary or compensation. The first thing I want to say is that talking about money is really, really scary, especially when it's your first job. I know the number of people who have come up to me asking like, okay, I got a job offer. What do I do with that? Do I just take it? Do I ask questions? Do I counteroffer? Do I push back? You know, it's a scary thing because a lot of times like you don't want to look bad, and there's this assumption that if I negotiate that somehow looks bad. And so one of the things that I learned in my first job, and honestly, I got this feedback from a mentor that I worked with in college. So even before I accepted the first job offer, um, my experience is that that first offer is rarely the last offer. Right? What a company sort of puts out to you initially is very rarely their drop dead price tag. That doesn't mean that you just ask for more money willy-nilly, right? But I think learning how to negotiate for yourself is really important, and I'm really glad that the company I worked for was open to that. And so some things that I learned is that, one, it's really important to know your value. So the position that you are interviewing for, what's a typical salary range or compensation benefits package for that? What experience do you have on the table that could move the needle on that price point? What skills do you bring to the table that you could use to back up a counteroffer if you choose to do so, right? Know the value that you're bringing to that company. And just because you are fresh out of college does not mean that you have no value. I think a lot of young people get sucked into this idea that, I don't have very much real world experience, so I should just be thankful for whatever I'm offered. And I'm not saying don't be thankful for what you're offered, but also recognize that, there could be some wiggle room in that first presentation. And so the second thing, so know your value is one piece of negotiating. Two, and I sort of mentioned this in terms of mentors who have given me feedback, is don't be afraid to ask for advice. If you've got some mentors at college or people you've worked with before, don't hesitate to ask them what they might do. Right. And, they might have some better context in terms of what that position should be compensated at. They also might have some experience on the other side of the table as the people who are doing the hiring, and what they appreciate seeing. But don't be afraid to reach out and ask for advice. I also know, I'm kind of different in this regard than maybe some people. I actually think we should be talking about compensation more, so that people have more knowledge, more context, more information about what fair compensation looks like. All too often, it's my belief that we do the whole, we don't talk about money in polite circles. And what that means is that young people really don't have any leg to stand on when you're talking about compensation. And so if it's something you're comfortable with as a mentor, as a more experienced professional, I think it can be valuable to share typical salary ranges or compensation packages, or maybe even what you make, with young people, so that they have something to work with. Otherwise, they're sort of going in blind. And I know asking those types of questions was super helpful for me when I first started my career. And I think just on that point, it will serve you for a long time to be able to learn how to negotiate, because your first job will not be the last time that conversations around salary and compensation will come up. So if you can start to practice that skill early, it will serve you for a very long time. I'm not sure, I know there's some statistics around this, but the other thing to keep in mind is that initial starting salary will dictate a lot of what you make for the rest of your career. And so as much as you can advocate for yourself to be compensated fairly, it will increase the likelihood that you will be compensated fairly for many years to come. Another thing, so I mentioned know your value, ask for advice. Another thing about compensation and negotiation is to ask yourself if it is just about money, or if there are other pieces that could be important to ask for in an initial job offer. So some things that might be considered depending on the job is, maybe the salary offer stays the same, but maybe you negotiate to have them cover moving expenses if you are moving to a new state or a new part of the state for the job. I know that's something, since I was moving from Michigan to Minnesota, that was something that that I actually advocated for myself on, is if the company could help me relocate. In some cases, it might be about having a vehicle for your job if it's a job that requires a lot of road time. Maybe it's about some additional PTO vacation days. It could be a whole host of things. But remember that money isn't always the end all and be all of a compensation package. There may be some other things that you want to talk about. And then finally, I personally think it's a good idea to counteroffer if you believe that your value that you're bringing to the company is worth it. Like I said, rarely does it seem like the first offer is the last offer. It's usually a starting point for a conversation. And worst case scenario, even if a company says no to your counteroffer, again, I really think it's good practice for you to learn how to negotiate for yourself. I'm going to talk more about that here coming up, but there will be lots and lots of times where you're going to have to learn to negotiate and advocate for yourself, of which talking about money is only one piece of it. So if you can leverage that opportunity for practice, it makes the experiences later down the line a little less scary. Obviously, like, know your value, know what you're bringing, know what's typical, but definitely take that chance, take that risk, even with it when it's scary, and put out the counter offer. And you never know what's going to happen. So that's one thing that, again, I'm really thankful for is in that first job, I learned how to negotiate around salary and compensation. The second part of advocating for yourself, in my view, comes back to asking for what you want or what you need. If there is one thing that I spend a ton of time on in coaching with young people, it is this: how do I ask for what I want or what I need? Right? So many of us, and I say us because I am definitely in this group, don't want to be seen as needy or as weak or like we don't know what we're doing. So we suffer with this desire to need or want more, but we hold ourselves back from asking for it because of this fear we have around how we'll be perceived. And so I think this shows up in a lot of different ways. Asking for feedback, clarity, or expectations when they're not being readily given. Asking to work on more or different types of things. Asking about what the next step in your career path is, especially when it seems like it's quote unquote too early to be curious about those things. Asking for a raise kind of goes with the previous point. Asking for a different type of supervision, or sometimes straight up asking for a different manager. And there are tons of other areas where at some point in your career, you're going to have to ask for what you need in order to be successful, or just what you want in order to advance in your career. And that's going to seem really scary. I am really grateful that in my first job, I had managers early on who taught me the importance of advocating for myself and asking for what I need. And so some of you have heard me talk about some of these topics. Managing and setting expectations, right? I learned to ask clarifying questions, to push back when things don't seem realistic, to fight for creating the circumstances that would allow for great work. And so managing and setting expectations is a key part of asking for what you need. Managing up, right? How do I set and manage those expectations specifically with my boss, right? Very often as young people, we think that there's no room for pushing back seems like a really negative term, but that whatever the boss says goes, right? And sometimes that means you're put in situations where you're not set up for success. And so learning to manage up is a really valuable skill to make sure that that the likelihood of people being happy with your work is increased. Okay. Another area that my managers, I'm so fortunate for who I had. They were really great at not freaking out when I was freaking out. So, for example, here's what that might mean in real life. I have a really bad habit of crying when I'm frustrated or scared to say what's on my mind. And I have been very fortunate to have managers who have not been fazed by that. So, spoiler alert, yes, I need to keep working on it. But what these really good managers taught me is that it is more important for me to speak up for myself than to stay silent out of fear or because I think I'm going to get emotional, right? Sometimes we believe that, oh, if I ask for that, I'm gonna get emotional, right? Or I'm gonna be too nervous, or I'm gonna say the right thing, or I'm gonna say the wrong thing. Practicing speaking up for yourself, practicing advocating for yourself, that practice is more important than the rough patches that you'll hit along the way. It will get easier. I will cry less over time. But if I refuse to ever speak up on my own behalf, that emotion will always be there because I've never practiced working through it. And so I guess I share that from two angles. One, if you are a young person who is afraid to speak up for yourself or ask clarifying questions or ask for what you need because you're afraid you can't keep it together, you can practice that in lots of different ways. And for managers, I know it's tough, but recognize that sometimes these are skills that young people have not had the chance to put to practice in real life before. And so you may have to, theoretically, philosophically, whatever the word is, be with them as they grow through some of those hard experiences. And I guess the biggest thing, whether it is negotiating for salary and compensation or asking for what you need or want, one of the biggest things that I am thankful for coming out of my first job is learning that you may have mentors or other advocates who will fight for you, but you also have to be your biggest champion. Because in many cases, if you do not ask for what you need, you will be waiting a very long time for someone to just magically give it to you. Number one thing I'm thankful for, learning how to and being guided in the practice of advocating for myself. The second thing I'm thankful for is that I was very, very fortunate to work for a company that recognized results over tenure. Okay. There are a lot of companies out there that will tell you, nope, you can't do this job until you've got 5, 7, 10, whatever number of years with the company. Right? Here's my soapbox moment. That mindset is a load of crap. Now, I'm not saying that experience isn't important. And there is indeed some experience that will require time for you to gain it, right? You can't always go from entry-level position to CEO in 6 months, right? That's just, I understand that is not how it works. That being said, I am so grateful to have started my career with a company that when they saw results, they rewarded it with moving you forward in your career. Okay. So I saw that as I performed, I got an increased level of responsibility. I pretty much got a promotion on an annual basis, and I was very well compensated for the work that I did. Um, they never said, oh, she's only 24, she can't do this, right? They said, she has proven the ability to do this job, so we are going to reward that. That's not to say that I didn't feel young, right? Imposter syndrome is a real thing. Um, but I am so thankful that I had managers and company leaders that if they trusted me with the work, they demonstrated that. Now, recognize, young people, that may not always be the case. But if you find an organization that really recognizes the work you do over the number of years you've been on the planet, that's a very special thing. And I would just say to those people who are managers, if you see someone who is performing at a high level, who is turning results, and part of you says, oh, should I move them forward? But then you have this part of you that says, I shouldn't promote them because they haven't, quote unquote, paid their dues, whatever that means. I'd really encourage you to challenge that story in your head, right? Is that young person really not ready? Or are you missing out on a really great opportunity to help that person grow because you're afraid of how it will look to have a 24, 25, 26-year-old in a certain position? It's one of those things where, remember, your story is about you and some of your own insecurities. And I know it's hard, right? I've been there too, to say, oh man, they do a good job, but man, they're only 25, right? Leadership knows no age. And the only way you can learn the next step in your career is by actually being in the next step. So be careful as a manager, as a leader, for holding talented people back because they don't have the tenure that you're used to in a certain role. The number 3 thing that I am incredibly thankful for from my first job is a great peer group. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this job was in Minnesota. I was originally from Michigan. And when I took that job, I knew absolutely no one. I had actually never even been to the state of Minnesota before I interviewed for the job. And so I was a fish out of water. But I will tell you, the people that I met who were in a similar role to me or who were in a similar age group to me proved to be absolutely indispensable. At the time, many of us were, 22, 23, 24, single, which means we did lots of happy hours, dinners, lunches. If you couldn't tell, we would like to eat. We hung out in our free time. I mean, I literally had so I worked for an advertising agency, and this was during the time when Mad Men, the TV show, was on. And so I literally had a standing Mad Men viewing party on Sunday nights with some of my coworkers, right? That group was absolutely critical to me feeling comfortable working 12 hours from home, 12 hours in 2 states from home. I was also really fortunate to have been involved in some industry organizations where I had met some more experienced professionals, and they connected me to younger people within their organization. So that was also great, just in expanding my network and connecting me to other people who are sort of, in the trenches, know what it's like to be doing what you do. So I know that not every company affords that opportunity, but as much as you can, really try to find peers that you get along with, that, you don't have to necessarily be best friends, but who know what you're going through and can sort of be your work buddies. And if you're a manager and maybe you've got, this happens, right? Maybe you've got just a couple of young people in an organization that's filled with a lot more experienced people. Who do you know from other companies in the area? Or is there a young professionals group in your region or something like that you can act as a conduit between them? I think this is important in any situation. It is especially important when you have employees who have relocated from home and what they know to a new geography. I will tell you, if they're not just natural joiners or people, um, a lack of connection. Remember, connection's one of the 6 basic human needs. A lack of connection could be something that creates turnover. And so as much as you as a manager or leader can facilitate peer groups and peer connections, it's good for people just at a basic human level. It's also good for your organization from a longevity employment standpoint. So just like a good peer group is something I am incredibly thankful for on that first job, I'm also incredibly thankful that I was exposed to a wide variety of mentors. I have been so incredibly fortunate to have great mentors, a great network, going back even farther than my first job, but including the company that I started my career out with. In that company, leadership really cared about everyone who worked there, and they weren't hesitant to give feedback or advice from their own careers, right? I remember hearing so many stories of, when I was 24, 25 and working at this place, this was my experience, right? Or here's how I moved from sort of those early years into the next phase. What was really cool is I got to work with lots of different people who came through different paths. Some had been with the same company for a very long time. Some had done more hopping around. It was kind of cool because I worked with people who came through maybe a more traditional college degree path. And then I also worked with people who went more of a trade school or technical training path. And then I worked with some people who really sort of just worked their way up and got a lot of on-the-job training. Also worked with people who, they'd always known what they wanted to do and had a pretty solid path, and others who did one thing for a while and then switched it up. So got exposed to lots of different perspectives, feedback, advice. And I will say for me, I was especially fortunate to have the experience of seeing and working with a wide variety of female leaders in particular. Each one of those women had a different style and a little something different to teach me. And I know I continue to pull from that as I coach young women in particular, because I know in some of the organizations we work with, they don't always have access to those sort of connections or to see women in that level of leadership. And so that's something I'm incredibly fortunate to have experienced, and something I know that as I look into management positions or work with managers to really emphasize the importance of mentors, male or female, but especially being able to see someone who looks like you or who has a similar experience or goals to you, that you can kind of say, yes, that's what I want. I should go learn from that person. Okay. And then the final thing that I'm really thankful for from my first job is that it gave me the opportunity to go out a limb and leave the nest, so to speak. I know I mentioned this several times already, but when I took that job, I moved to a new state, new city, a new job. I knew absolutely no one at this huge transition point in life from college student into professional. And I know we have clients and people listening to this who, are in a similar situation or will be in a similar situation. And I can only tell you that taking that risk provided the opportunity to meet so many amazing people. It gave me the opportunity to basically have a second home. I say, I have to make an annual trip back to Minnesota because it just feels like such a second home away from home for me. And it also just gave me an incredibly different perspective of the world. Right? Now, I recognize that this is not the path for everyone, and that lots of folks, after you finish school or whatever training you have, that it's your goal to come back home. And if that's your path, more power to you. Totally support that. I personally just have this philosophy that, for the most part, you can always go back home. There's, for many of us, though, only a short period of time, before spouses and kids and attachments where we have that flexibility and that independence to go out and experience a new place and new people. And so whether you just go and work and be somewhere for 1 year or you move away from home and end up there forever, I think people should take the opportunity to move away from where you grew up, even for just a little bit. Even if you're a college student listening to this and you want to go home, even just to have a summer internship that's a little farther away, I think is such a great opportunity to learn so much. It really gives you a different lens on life, on people, on the world, that it's hard to get if you only stick to what you know. So again, I know that's not for everyone, but if I'm thinking about, man, what am I thankful to have learned and experienced in my first job that continues to serve me to this day, that experience of living somewhere else and being exposed to new people, new kinds of people and environments really was indispensable, something that I will always have. So those are my post-Thanksgiving, post-old coworker wedding reflections on appreciations. 5 things that I learned in my first job that, I hope other young people might learn from, and that I hope maybe some managers and leaders out there might think about as you're supporting your up and coming young professionals. So, one, advocating for yourself is critical, whether that is from a really technical perspective like salary and compensation, or just asking for what you need to do your job successfully. Advocating for yourself is critical. 2, looking for companies that recognize results over tenure, and as managers looking for opportunities for growth for young people who prove that they are capable of stepping up to the plate and getting the job done. 3, the importance of a great peer group, people who are in the trenches with you, who know what you're going through, who can support you through the ups and downs because they are there too. And then on the flip side of that, having a wide variety of mentors who may not be where you are today, but have been there in the past and can provide some perspective and feedback. And then finally, number 5, if it's for you, looking for opportunities to sort of step out of your comfort zone, travel, live somewhere new, even just for a little bit. It makes you look at home a little bit differently. With that, I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. I know we here at MJST are incredibly thankful for each and every one of you, and we hope to see you back here next week.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you like what you heard, make sure to jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. We appreciate the feedback, and it helps other people find the show. On that same note, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with a friend. As always, if you're looking for more resources to go from surviving to thriving, check out our website at www.markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's. And you can find us under Mark Jewel Speaking and Training on all the major social networks. Remember, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. See you next week.